Hi guys, now that the new year is here, I'm sure there are lots of you with the New Year's resolution to read more books. And in today's video, I am going to be offering you my tips on how to read more. Typically in a year, I read over 50 books. Sometimes that can be up to 100. Sometimes I've even read more than 100 books in a year. But in this video, I don't want to tell you how to read a specific number of books because all of you will have a figure in mind for the number of books that you want to read during the year. So with that in mind, this video is for all of you, whether you want to read 10 books this year, 100 books, 200 books if you're feeling extra brave, or even just 2 books. No matter how much you've read in the past, this video will hopefully set you up for reading more than you ever have. So my first tip is to figure out how your brain works, whether you like working with numbers or whether having a number puts pressure on you. So personally, I don't like to set myself a set goal of a certain number of books. I have found that when I have said I want to read, for example, 10 books in a year, I feel the pressure and then read less. So my brain works better when I set myself a low goal. For example, I always set my goal at 1 book because anything else is a bonus, and then I go through the year feeling relaxed because I already know that I am ahead. Whereas you may feel differently and prefer a number, so you might choose to read 25 books this year, 1 every 2 weeks roughly, and having that goal in mind might spur you on. It might motivate you to read more because you'll be reminded when you think of the number you've set and see the number of books you have read, how far you have to go. Or your brain might work somewhere in the middle and you might like to set yourself a low target, so you might like to ideally read 20 books, but you might set yourself a challenge of 12 books, 1 every month, and then if you get close to that, you could extend it. So I think either of these 3 approaches works, but think about previous goals you've set yourself and then work out how your brain works, because that gives you a good foundation for reading more. I understand that in this modern day we live in, there are lots of distractions and lots of things you could be doing at any one time. Even though I read lots, I'm always looking at my phone, I am always doing things online, I'm always thinking about other things when I'd actually like to be reading. So before you seriously get going with your reading goals, think about a typical day or week in your life. For one day, think about every single thing you did, every task you completed, and when and how you did it. So if I was looking at a typical day in my life, I sometimes wake up at 7 o'clock and then I will stay in bed for a little bit because I'm lucky enough to work at home, and then I'll have my breakfast and then I will watch lots and lots of YouTube videos, I'll listen to music, I'll be checking on my social media before I then get into my work for the day. So I'll work in the morning, then I'll have a lunch break for about an hour in which I'll have my lunch, but then I'll have some extra time to watch YouTube again, to scroll through Instagram, to check my emails, and then I'll have another slot in the afternoon where I do work, and then by the time it gets to the evening I might watch some TV. Once I've done all my work for the day, I again turn to my phone a lot. So I'm looking quite specifically about all the times in the day when actually I could replace one task with reading. So when I wake up in the morning, for example, I usually read through the news app, but on my phone I could download the iBooks app and I could be reading a chapter of my book first thing in the morning, something quite light and simple before I get going. Or as I'm eating my breakfast, I could be reading. Or if you commute, for example, and you typically do nothing on your commute, that could be a time when you could fit that reading in. You're not going, I'm never going to use my phone, I'm never going to do this. You're just looking at places where you could reduce that slightly and fit reading in. Reading more is all about changing your habits, even just slightly, and sometimes that can be a wrench, but look at the parts of your day when it won't be an issue, because if you want to read more, you also have to think positively about it and you have to be eager to change change some of those habits, because reading is fun and it can be very different. You don't get the instant gratification that you get from some other activities, but in the long run it is such an enjoyable thing to do. You just need to change up a few things and you'll have so much more time to read. My next tip is to organise a TBR pile or a to be read pile. This could be a collection of a few books that you are lining up to read once you've finished your current read. And I find that if I don't have a few books lined up, then I start to think, oh, what should I read? I'm not sure what to read, and that's a lot of brain energy to decide what to read, so I tend to not read. So if I have one book on the go that I'm currently reading and I get towards the end, I'll then think, this is what I'm going to read next, and then I get excited about reading that. I'll read the blurb, I'll see what other people are saying about it, and that excitement is what makes me read more, because I'm moving from one book to the next quite quickly because of that excitement. Your TBR pile doesn't need to be long depending on how much you read. It could just be a few books, or once you've finished one book and have another in the pipeline, you might like to treat yourself for finishing that other book by buying yourself a new one, by borrowing a new one from the library. And these things also don't have to be expensive, so you don't have to buy all the books you read. You can borrow them from the library. There are free books online from places like Project Gutenberg and archive.org. Never pirate books, because that's extremely damaging to the authors and highly unrecommended. But there are so many ways that you can read books affordably, so that doesn't have to be a barrier. Another thing that's wise to do is to analyse your reading. So personally, I am a mood reader. I like to read books depending on what mood I'm in, and whilst I do have a few genres and categories I like, my mood is the main thing that affects how much I read and what I read. So you might be a mood reader like me, or you might like to just stick to one genre or category. You might like reading crime thrillers, for example, and so that is what drives you on to read more, your love of that genre. So think about what you've read in the past. You might like to make a list of your favourite books and then have a look online, have a Google around, have a think about other books that are similar, and you can look on places like Goodreads too, which is an online website where you can record your reading and read other people's reviews. And I generally find that researching and looking around for books to read excites my curiosity for books, and that curiosity is one of the greatest gifts you can have as a reader. My next piece of advice for reading more is to not feel guilty for reading. I think because reading is quite a passive activity where you're just sat down reading, it can often feel like you should be doing something that's busier or more active. You should be out doing something, you should be doing some kind of activity that involves more work to it. But really you shouldn't feel guilty for reading, because it is such an enjoyable activity to do and you get so much from it. Once you have started your reading, you'll definitely find that you'll get momentum going, and that's how you also read more. This is when your TBR pile comes in handy, because you'll be looking ahead to what you're going to be reading next. But also, as you read more, your confidence will grow. When I first started reading, particularly classics and older books, I didn't have much confidence, so I read them slower. But as I read more and more, my confidence grew and I found that I was reading more and more quickly. My penultimate piece of advice for you for reading more is to not think that you are either too clever or too stupid to read a certain book. You may feel like you're superior for some books. You feel like you shouldn't read YA, for example, because you're too good for it, or you shouldn't read romances. Or on the other hand, you might not think that you have the knowledge to read classics or to read books in translation, or you might feel that you don't want to tackle a book over 500 pages because it's just so overwhelming. But no book is above or beneath you. All books are books, and all books are equal, so have fun with your reading. And when you think like this, so many more books are open to you. And finally, have fun with your reading. There is no point in continuing with a book that you are hating, that you think, I don't want to be reading this. So never be afraid to put a book down if you aren't enjoying it, but embrace the books that you love too. Reread old favourites, try and discover new authors, have fun with the books that you choose. Make sure that you are reading more for the right reasons, because it is something that you want to enjoy rather than it's something that you feel like you should do to become more clever, or it's something that other people are doing so you feel like you should. There is no shame in reading very little, and that's why I try to emphasise that it's not the number that matters, it's just how you are feeling towards the books you are reading. I really hope that this video has encouraged you to read more this year, and I'd love to know your progress as the year goes by. I hope you enjoyed this video. Good luck and happy reading!